Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Tourpreneur podcast episode. And this morning, I'm hugely thrilled to welcome Xavier Font. Xavier is a professor at the University of Surrey in England, sunny England, and he's also the editor-in-chief Journal of Sustainable Tourism. Xavier has been around the sustainability in travel concept since Jesus was a baby. If you look at his history, he has been involved in sustainability efforts in the travel industry going back over 20 years. Not only is he a professor, he's worked in private businesses as well, so he understands business as well as sustainability, and he also consults to the European Union on sustainability in travel. So we can have no better expert or knowledge base to help us find our way through the sustainability mess that none of us really understand, and we're hoping to start to understand in a better way to try and make our businesses better. So welcome, Xavier.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start off with, everybody's heard of sustainable travel. All our tour operators are doing something, be it a lot or a little. It's definitely a discussion, whether it goes into action. Bring us up to date. What are the trends in sustainable travel today? And are the trends real, or are they all just noise?
Okay, I think it's worth starting by saying there's no such thing as sustainable travel, because at the moment we have fairly significant impacts, particularly from transport to the destination, but also the impacts that we cause at the destination. We can measure our economic, social, and environmental impacts. We can add up all the positive impacts that we have on one side and all the negative impacts that we have on the other, and hope that the balance is more positive than negative. Typically what we do is we become very good at measuring the positive impacts, and we tend to underplay or undermeasure the negative impacts because they make us feel uncomfortable.
So if I understood what you just said there is, if we keep growing growth, which by all accounts and all the data we're seeing, growth seems to be baked into the industry because of demographics, more and more people becoming a bit wealthier. Therefore, we know the trend. Once people get some wealth, take care of their main needs, they then start to travel, albeit locally, then regionally, then internationally. So if I just understood what you said, the growth travel is going to go through, probably negate the efforts of sustainability.
Well, so we are all seem to be hoping that technology will save the day and suddenly airplanes will run on flower power and everything will be fine. At the moment, the scale of the problem with business as usual is growing faster than the scale of the solution. So we are finding ways of reducing the impact per head when we travel, but the increase in number of travelers is disproportionate to the savings that we are making through the improvement in technology. So we have both technology and we have behavior change. And we seem to be hoping that because technology will do something, we don't have to change our behaviors.
So we're basically in a world of hope, is what you're saying. We're hoping, and technology is not developing fast enough to keep up with the growth of travel.
True, but also this is not specific to travel and tourism, right? We see these all the time. If you're watching the news, you'll hear about pesticides that kill butterflies and bees, and they're basically threatening our biodiversity. We have known about this for a long time. Governments are unwilling to legislate because certain companies have way too much power. The same happens in tourism. It's just that the problem for us is worse. So with pesticides, there are alternatives, for example, to those pesticides. And I'm using that as an example where there is a real solution available right now. With transport right now, the alternatives to flying with kerosene are very, very limited. Now, typically the carbon footprint of one of your holidays, if you're an adventure tour operator, 70 to 80% of the carbon footprint of your holiday is going to be flying to a destination. 20-30% is going to be what happens when you get there. Sometimes just focusing too much on the detail of what happens when you get there is a little bit like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, because you choose to ignore the 70 to 80% of your carbon footprint.
The transport, which is the flight, which is the part that we are pretty powerless at the moment.
Yeah, and And I know you'll tell me, I'm a tour operator based in the US. I want to take people to Latin America for argument's sake. I have no way other than flying. Absolutely. But you can select the airlines that are most carbon efficient. You can not shorten the length of your trips. So pretty much every tour operator seems to be under pressure to go further on fewer days. And that trend is really damaging. And we can find ways of trying to promote direct flights or more sustainable forms of transport when you get to a destination. So, for example, if you're going to do the Golden Triangle in India and you're flying from Europe, just don't have internal flights inside India. Just make sure there is one fly in, one fly out, and you're recommending the most carbon efficient, companies. Then, by all means, do everything you can at the destination to create meaningful jobs, to promote biodiversity, to promote environmental education, and so on. But that, without taking into account some of the carbon footprint of travel, is just not going to be sufficient.
You mentioned earlier other industries and other sectors. Where does the travel industry fit in the damage it's doing versus other industries? And if you extrapolate that forward, is the travel industry getting better in the scheme of everything, or is it getting worse versus other industries?
So that's the key. The travel industry at the moment, and the air industry, for example, will say we're responsible at the moment based on some people's accounts, for 2% of the carbon footprint in the world. And they'll say running all of the internet, for example, accounts for 4%. Housing, heating, right? The other thing, though, is, of course, agriculture accounts for a bigger carbon footprint than traveling for holidays. But agriculture and heating your home and dressing yourself and traveling to work is essential for survival. Traveling on holiday is not essential for survival of the human species. So that's the first point to make. Second one is pretty much every other sector is decarbonizing much, much faster than we are in transport. Road transport, with electrification, whether we think much or little of electrification of cars, is moving away from using petrol. By 2030, tourism, air transport, for example, will be probably one of the single most important sectors for carbon footprint in the world, because every other sector is decarbonizing faster than we are. And at that moment, politicians will find it very, very difficult to defend the sector. Now, any single sector is not good at fast adjustments. We saw that in COVID. And Pete, you are the king of looking at risk assessment. Why is it that companies are not looking more at how do we how do we have a transition plan to move away from dependency on certain markets and certain products? Because legislation will come in, right? The cost of flying will go up.
So, did I hear you correctly there? You just said 2030, 6 years away?
Sure. Think of, for example, what's happening in Europe. All the growth in energy consumption in Europe over the last 5 years has been renewable energy. We have, across the world, we have plateaued now on the consumption, the collective consumption on non-renewable energy. And the growth of 30% on world energy consumption has been entirely from renewables. The next thing is to drop the amount or the percentage as well as the total amount on non-renewable energy. And this is coming. Household energy, obviously retrofitting homes is difficult. Retrofitting transport systems is difficult. But we are doing it. We're doing it much, much faster than we realize. It's not glamorous, but it's happening. Except for airplanes.
Except for airplanes, which is the main part of our industry.
Yeah. And then you've got sectors like cruise lines, for example, are now making these big claims that we're going to reduce our impacts by 30% by 2030. You know how they're doing this? They're installing scrubbers. But the technology for those scrubbers existed 10, 15 years ago. They could have done this a long time ago. They're trying to buy themselves time by doing for as long as they can the wrong thing. So then when they want to show reductions, they can show it later on with technology that already existed. In addition, this is a reduction per passenger, not in total. This is carbon intensity, not total carbon. but you keep sending more and more people places.
Yes. So that leads me on, because I know a lot of your research and a lot of your work in the past, not just been around sustainability, but how sustainability is marketed.
Sure.
And that's where a lot of confusion arises by, and tour operators are as guilty as anybody else in travel of using sustainability messages as part of the marketing, which is often to say we're a sustainable operator, we're green. There's many certifications now. In fact, I've lost count how many certifications there is. There's so many certifications it just confuses me. So is it valid to use sustainability, whatever it means, in your marketing?
So let me just take that in parts. One is less than 1% of the companies in the world are certified. My concern is not to start splitting hairs within that 1%, right? Most companies that are choosing to become certified, they're sticking their head above the parapet, and to a certain extent, more or less rigorous, but they're going through a form of independent third-party assessment. I'm more interested in what do we do with the 99%. If we keep obsessing with that 1%, we'll be in trouble, right? There are a lot of companies that will make claims about being sustainable, or in some languages, the word sustainable, eco, and nature tourism are the same. So we could use some back translation when we ask people from certain countries to see what the sustainability mean. When I was doing training in a country in the Arab world, I gave somebody the word environmental management and told them, please rewrite in Arabic. And then ask a different person to rewrite from Arabic back to English what that word meant. And the word that came back was beautification, right? So, and I would suggest any of your tour operators to go to your suppliers in another country and ask them this word, sustainability, translate into your home language, and then ask a different person to translate that word back for you to see what really is understood in that culture, right? So in Egypt, what I understood as environmental management was making the hotels beautiful, make the gardens pretty, typically by using, plants that don't belong here, that require a lot of watering, that the water means that they're attracting mosquitoes, which the customers, of course, don't like. So then we use pesticides to kill the mosquitoes every day. So we're now overusing water, and we're overusing chemicals to water a desert.
We have a communication issue. Before we have a sustainability issue, we have a communication.
Indeed. The second issue there to consider is the EU has now brought out the Green Claims Directive, which they're rolling out, and nobody really knows what it means, but there are a lot of people who are now panicking. As far as I understand the directive at the moment, and based on what's available, any company in the world that sells products or services to European consumers, regardless whether the company is based in Indonesia or in the United States or in France or indeed the UK, will have to comply with European legislation on green claims. Because they're saying it's not about where your company is based, but it's based on what harm you can do to European consumers by misleading European consumers. It feels a little bit colonial, but bear with me. The idea here is that you cannot make any claim about sustainability without having independent third-party proof that your claim can be validated. Right. Now, but we worry about this. But if you ask Procter & Gamble and Unilever and any other company, do you have a legal team that looks at legal compliance of any marketing claims you make? If you're saying this product is going to make you thinner, this product is good for your health, this product is going to have any benefits, your legal team will always have to verify those claims. We have not done that with sustainability claims because simply we thought they were less important claims than the other claims you have to make. Right? So the only thing that we're doing is we're bringing green claims to the same level of scrutiny as any other marketing claims we've had so far. Right? So that has good news and bad news. It has good news because most companies have a due diligence process for checking the credibility of any other claim they make. Right? The travel package regulations in Europe has done that for a very long time. So all we're saying is we're elevating green claims to that level. What it does mean is there's a lot of things that we do for sustainability that feel right, that intuitively as a company you know you're doing good, but now you're wondering, can I say this, and how do I say it?
Do you have any data? There's a saying, it's what people say and what people do is often different. And I think that saying is never more relevant than in the realms of sustainability. So the actual consumer, survey after survey after survey that everybody in the industry's read, people say they want to do more green travel, they want to not harm what people say, but then when we action and actually watch what the tourists do, it's often miles away from what they say. Is there any research or any data or any words of wisdom on that conundrum?
So I think a lot of the research done on whether there is a business case for sustainable tourism, whether people wanted to buy it, whether there's a greater willingness to pay for those products, is based on the desire to have proof. And too many of us have been complicit in not scrutinizing that evidence enough and not finding out whether the way that the evidence has been collected is substantial enough. One good thing with that evidence is, if you look at that survey done by that same company year on year, you can see trends. So you can see whether over time there's an increase in the number of people that claim, all conditions being equal, they would like to buy more sustainable products, for example. And the survey most people seem to be using right now is the one that Booking.com publishes every year, at least in Europe. But maybe in the United States, they'll use a different survey and so on. Okay? The challenge with all these surveys is we can't really trust them very well, because most of us have a habit of saying one thing and doing another one. Even a survey, you ask me, are you a good father? I'll say yes. But if you ask my kids, I may say something else. Yeah? So in the journal I edit, we're now moving away from publishing behavioral intentions and willingness to pay surveys anymore, because we don't see it anymore as reliable data that academics should be investing any time towards. And instead, we are calling out to companies just like the ones that are listening to the podcast to work with us as academics to do real experiments, to be able to find out whether under the current methods of communicating sustainability and promoting products, customers really buy that, and how do we experiment with making changes to actually the design of the product as well as the way it's communicated, see if we can optimize it. And I've done work like this with the Dutch Tour Operator Association, with ATO members in England, and so on.
You mentioned earlier the government word, and nobody travel really likes when the government starts regulating big footprint in. And you also mentioned 2030. In your view, is it inevitable that regulation is coming and that regulation is going to be hard?
I think that it depends on which government department you ask. So if you have a Minister of Environment, they'll want to regulate it. If you have a Minister of Tourism, they will definitely want to deregulate it. And ministries seem to be fighting with each other. So in the EU, you've got governments. Well, essentially, the EU has said we have the 30-30 strategy. 30% of Europe has to be protected for wildlife by 2030. This is 30% of marine land as well as land-based land. And you then have tourism saying, but okay, we still see ourselves as the way of being able to generate income for those places. So we have to grow the amount of tourism, that we have in those places as opposed to other forms of industry, but equally not really accounting the negative impacts that we have.
We are seeing, I hate the word over-tourism, but it's the word that gets used. I always look at it as mismanaged tourism. Too many people in the wrong place rather than spreading them out.
Sure.
We do seem to be having regulation coming quite thick and fast because of that impact in different destinations. In regulation of Venice, Barcelona, Edinburgh, close to me. The volume of Airbnbs in Scotland has been reduced dramatically because this what worries me about governments. Governments often take a sledgehammer to a nut. Edinburgh had a problem with Airbnbs.
Yeah.
It certainly did, but they applied the regulations to the whole of Scotland. So someone on a little remote island is getting the same regulations as someone in the centre of a major city when the issues were completely and utterly different.
So did you know that in the UK, you paid fewer taxes as the owner of a property if you rented it through Airbnb and Booking than if you rented it to a family all year round.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, you need to regulate in other ways. Every single human being should have the right to own one home. Nobody has the right to own multiple homes until everybody has one home. And probably that tells something about my politics. But, honestly, food and shelter is a fundamental human right. Okay? But you have to find other ways of regulating. And these knee-jerk reactive regulations that we see now are just there for political gain as far as I can see. If you had managed this properly, the industry could have adjusted. What you can't do is just come in reactively and say, in 3 years' time, Barcelona will have 0 properties. Let's turn it around. We all talk about Airbnb. Did you know there are more self-catering properties now retail through Booking.com than through Airbnb?
Nice.
Of the 23 million properties that Booking has, about 8 million are self-catering properties. Airbnb is on 7.5 million. The main difference here is that when you go to Booking, you're just searching for a weekend break in Berlin, and you will mix hotels and self-catering rentals. But self-catering always have a higher customer satisfaction rating than hotels, right? Any of you do a test in one destination you're familiar with, and you will see the difference. People are always more satisfied with an apartment than they are with a hotel. This probably tells you something about how the business model of hotels has not evolved for a very long time, but that's an entirely different conversation.
Leading on from that, because often when we talk about sustainability, we think green and decarbonisation.
Sure.
But a big part of sustainability is this issue of how the traveller is impacting the destination and the people who live in the destination and the communities, whether that is a rural village somewhere in Asia or whether it's in the centre of Barcelona. Travellers are impacting people in destination for positive and for negative. And that doesn't seem to be getting wrapped up in the sustainability conversation as much as the green initiatives in the sustainability conversation.
So every destination should conduct a social impact assessment to find out what are residents' perceptions of tourism. And we've seen now that some destinations are acknowledging this, where they're saying, I will do a social impact assessment for the whole of Scotland. And you're thinking, how pointless is that? Right? This is a bit like saying, somewhere in my body there may well be a cancer. I'm going to scan the entire body superficially, and overall, it doesn't look like there is one. Yeah, but that's because you're not looking in the right way and in the right place. Like, identify the pockets where the problems are and find a way of dealing with them. If you calculate averages across an entire region, in much of which region there is no tourism and in some other areas it's doing good, you're saying, on average, across the whole of Scotland, we don't have a problem. But that's not what we're trying to do, right? What are we going to wait until the whole country, is, cancer-ridden before we say, whoops, now we've seen it, right? So you have to find way, but to me, the problem here is civil servants and politicians who work in tourism are uncomfortable with some of the data about sustainability. They would rather not collect the data than find out the data contradicts their current policies and strategies. And I'm also thinking, some of the people who are listening to this call today, what actions are they taking to move towards accounting better for the impacts? Even if you're not accounting at 100% accuracy, that's fine. Use an 80-20 rule. Find a way that with minimum cost, you can say with a certain margin of error, I understand some of the impacts that I've got. And I can start to understand and think about what could I do differently.
By definition, we could take the point that all travel does have negative impact, particularly if we've used transport, as we've discussed, airlines. Even without airlines, all travel has a positive and negative impact.
Sure.
There'll be a pyramid of different types of travel. That some are worse, some are better, some are as good as it can possibly be, even though there's some negatives in there. So what are some of the worst models you've seen in the travel industry?
Well, I don't understand why fly and flying and cruise is still a product that exists because the carbon footprint of those is doubling up the problem. After flying, which was bad enough in itself, now you jump on a metal box to take you from place to place and leave almost no positive economic impact on the places you have visited. But I'm also concerned that if we just focus on which are the worst, we're going to go back to that idea of over-tourism happens in Barcelona, Venice and Berlin. And then the rest of us say, well, job done, I'm not in the short list, so I can keep doing business as usual. I would say to each one of your members, regardless of what type of product you've got and experience you've designed, how do each one of us say, let's improve the product by 1%? And 100 improvements of 1% are far more meaningful than one improvement of 100%.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because otherwise we play the game of pointing fingers at somebody else, and we can say, oh, look, somebody's worse than me. I went to a conference to Germany, but somebody else flew from Australia, so I'm not that bad, because somebody else is far, far worse. Yeah, what does that solve?
The hard reality is all of us, and I include myself in this certainly, who work in travel, are we travel more than anyone else. We travel more than any consumer travels. A consumer may travel once, twice, 3 times a year, whereas many in the industry are traveling every single week.
Sure. So linked to that, we've done some research in our university that looks at the impact of hypermobility, those people that fly at least once per month. The likelihood of you dying of a chronic illness, multiplies exponentially. The likelihood of divorce and the likelihood of being estranged from your children also multiply exponentially.
Jesus, you're cheering me up here because I fly at least once a month.
Okay, so what we're trying to do here is there's a bunch of people like you and me who do that, who are not going to change for environmental reasons. And we thought probably your health and the sustainability of your family are more important to you, more immediate than this health of the planet.
Yeah.
Right? So for starters, how many of us should really ask ourselves, that next trip I'm going on, is it really essential? What difference would it make? And what's the opportunity cost of me going there? I could be using that time differently. So I've reduced my travel for work significantly because of that, and I'm much more efficient. I'm focusing on what's important, not what's urgent. But linked to that, then when we travel somewhere, can we just make sure that in that same trip we can do multiple things together? So for example, the idea now of combining work and travel is becoming much more popular. At least out of the UK, many people will be working from home 2 days per week. And hey, if I could do a 5-day trip to Barcelona, 2 of which I'll be working from the hotel, but then for many hours I'm still enjoying Barcelona. And then I can make it a long weekend by doing that. 5 days in Barcelona, 2 of which I work from a hotel, to me is better than having spent those 2 days working from my really small office in my house, where it's going to be much colder and outside is going to be much more grey.
Do you see, obviously we're building from the outside and pushing on to the consumer.
Sure.
Do you see the consumer at any scale demanding that the industry changes, or is it just the niche consumer who is looking at sustainability?
The consumer wants sustainable experiences. Emphasis on experience. So we need the people who are in charge of experience design in your tour operators to design how will I provide meaningful, memorable experiences by the fact that those happen to be more sustainable. Right? So what we've seen in experience design is people don't remember the length of an experience. People remember the peak moment and the end moment. Yeah. And what I'm thinking of here is, can we design a peak moment that is somehow implicitly, not explicitly related to sustainability? So I went to Machu Picchu. I really enjoyed the trip there. Arriving in Machu Picchu was amazing, but actually probably my best memories are from playing football with the son of my tour guide and his friends when we stopped for a break between Cuzco and Machu Picchu. And we just had an experience that I thought, I'm going to take this home and I'm going to cherish it forever. How many of us, when we rate the quality of a place where we stayed or a tour that we went on, we don't rate whether the floors were made of marble but we actually rate the human connections. And our sector, especially the adventure tourism sector, is really, really good at that. So let's design sustainable, meaningful experiences. Rather than pretending that you will tell people what's the carbon footprint of the flight or what's the negative impact they've had on something, and they will choose the least negative option because that's making them feel guilty.
Yeah. Is there anything, tools, platforms, anything you would recommend to our listeners, your majority small, medium-sized tour operators? Is there any tools that you're aware of that can help them on their journey to becoming more sustainable?
There are a number of them, and probably one of the platforms that's become most popular amongst tour operators recently to learn the journey towards sustainability is Travel by B Corp. So B Corp is now certifying businesses in pretty much every sector. And Travel by B Corp is a smaller group, but growing really fast, of tour operators and other travel-related companies that are becoming certified through B Corp to learn how to create that change. I have no affiliation with B Corp, by the way. I'm not advising them in any way, and I'm not an assessor of them. So I have no reason why I should recommend these over and above others. I'm recommending it simply because it's grown faster than others, and some of the tools they may already be aware of.
And because I've looked at these things in the past, albeit a long while ago, it looked like you needed a lot of resources within your business, which for a bigger business is fine, but if for small, medium-sized, there may only be two people working in that business, that experienced business. What is the resource and the time that it's going to take to do something, be B Corp or one of the other ones? How much resource is required to go through this process?
Again, to me, you need to look at the risk of different activities. And so putting your house in order is a good thing because it helps you plan the strategy of your business. And then understanding which are the most significant impacts you've got to deal with and what are the options available to you within those most significant impacts is key. There is no way you can say, I'm going from not having a plan to then having a perfect plan, right? So you need to be measured with how much work you'll put into it, and needs to be proportionate to the size of your company and the type of impacts that you are responsible for. Equally, as a company, you may say, you know what? This year we prioritize waste reduction. Next year we prioritize creating better equal opportunities for men and women working our supply chain. And another year we'll work on something else. There is no way you can handle all those things at once, particularly if you're a small company.
One of the things in my history when I was a tour operator, I always found it, try and find something that you were aligned with, just tour operator, because as a motivation thing to make you do things. So one of my business was a rafting company, so we were on rivers. So one of the things every year we did was we would take several days off and clean up rivers. We would take the boats, we'd get some people from the local villages involved, get them on the river and pull out all of this rubbish and waste that had mounted up in the river. And people would get engaged because they felt it was aligned with what they were doing. Yeah. So we have 120 plus verticals in the tour operating sphere. It's finding these things that are aligned with whatever your business is. I think it motivates people a bit more.
That makes a lot of sense. I've seen accommodations that on the first weekend they open for the season, they invite all of their regulars to come and stay for free, but they will help in repairing some of the, boxes and, anything that can have like a nature sort of benefit for the place. And that property tells me that the sense of belonging, the sense of friendship amongst the people that visit there is fantastic. It's actually the single most popular weekend in the year. It creates amazing goodwill amongst those most loyal customers.
Yeah, and if we actually look at the skill base of the audience listening to this, the tour operators, what do tour operators do? They design experiences and implement experiences. So it's totally feasible for every tour operator to actually design an experience that gets the guests involved in doing good, whatever that good is, because they have that skill set as a natural byproduct of what they're doing anyway.
Sure. The example I was giving you earlier on about Machu Picchu is not something I did myself personally, but it's an example that a tour operator, and I won't mention them by name, told me that they had done as a way of creating social enterprises in their supply chain. And they say it works so well that in the comments, from customers, they used to say this was the highlight of our trip. So they asked me and my research team to find ways of designing a unique experience in every single one of the most popular tours, as a way of creating that memorable moment that had a sustainability undertone. And you don't have to use the S word to communicate sustainability messages. Focus on what's in it for the customer and communicate the customer benefit. Those people that know what it means, they'll know what to do next with it. In the same way, if I go to a restaurant and they tell me we compost, I know it reduces food waste. And the people who don't have that knowledge, you're not going to communicate to them by starting with a message around food waste. We start by saying, the garden in my hotel looks much more pretty and much more interesting because we use compost. And later on, we can tell them where the compost came from.
I've seen some growth, quite significant growth, with a small niche of tour operators who are trying to build businesses on the back of not flying. And this is mainly in Europe, because Europe has a fantastic rail network. So there is a substitute to flying if the experience has been hosted on mainland Europe. Some of the growth numbers that these small, they're now medium-sized tour operators are getting are quite substantial. Therefore, that sort of tells me the message that with good design and good thought, the customer base is there. The customer base is willing to engage. If the marketing message connects with the right customer, the customers seem to be willing to increasingly pay good money for a non-flying experience.
Sure. We need to remember that you'll have to be more creative, right? And you'll have to find a way of differentiating yourself. None of the companies that we talk about are unsustainable because they woke up and said, I want to destroy the planet today, right? So we become unsustainable as a byproduct of going for the quickest, the fastest, the most convenient, the easiest, the laziest choice, right? And customers, by default, they are lazy. They want hassle-free holidays. So if you're going to promote sustainability as an alternative to quality, price, location, convenience, risk, novelty, you're going to lose, right? Customers want that sustainability helps them with something they already wanted to do. One of the key purchasing attributes. So you need to find out how your sustainable design, little as it may be, and remember, it's about 1% improvements, trial and error, learning, redesigning, right? Continuous learning processes. How do you keep doing that? And obviously going from flying to not flying is a very big jump with high risk. But there are many smaller things you can do earlier on to keep optimizing your current product. And I would almost say, take two approaches. One is you've got your business as usual products. You can say, as part of my continuous improvement for my products, how do I keep improving each one of them by 1% per year? Right? So I'm taking people to, let's say, Siem Reap, and we're going to see, Angkor Wat and so on. Where do you take them for lunch? There are 2 or 3 restaurants in Siem Reap where they're employing people who they've helped to get out of being at risk of going into prostitution. And they've given them meaningful jobs. Why do you use one of those restaurants as opposed to a standard restaurant? Because there's a fantastic story that you can tell on the back of that. Very often it becomes the highlight. You're not changing the rest of your trip. There were plenty of options of where to eat in Siem Reap. You were going to have to eat there anyway, right? So these small changes start getting you somewhere, but also they create the goodwill from customers, right? Because if you offer them unique experiences, later on, if something doesn't quite work, you've got them on your side.
And these little changes, and I travel a lot, so I'm not 1% or 5%. It causes a lot of this pain. But I recently changed the way I get to the airport. I can't change the flight because I have to get the flight to where I'm going. I live on an island. But the way I get to the airport has changed. And my main airport is 60 miles away from me. I now catch an electric bus to the airport.
Okay.
And this bus is, the reason I'm doing it is not for sustainability.
Sure.
That's a byproduct. The reason I'm doing it is it's more comfortable. The system they've set up, which is a very Uber-like system, is brilliant. It's much better than any bus I've ever used in the past. and value for money is fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's better than me actually driving to the airport.
Yeah.
So there's a whole host of reasons, and a byproduct is it's an electric bus that's better for that journey to go there. And I've watched it grow for the last 2 years, and it started off with virtually no one in it. And now you have to book well in advance. This thing is busy now.
Yeah. Equally, if you go to China on holiday, pretty much all the new vehicles are electric, right? Every moped, every car is electric, all the new ones. And there's a very fast process of replacement. And what I noticed was just how silent the streets were compared to before, feeling really chaotic.
So these little, your point of the 1% improvement, if you scale that up with all businesses doing it, and then you get the similar effect with consumers doing it, that 1% is a big number.
So as a tour operator, you're not going to go, let's say one of your products is taking people on a river tour, and you have a local supplier. You're not going to, don't ask the question, are you willing to pay more for a sustainable boat? Ask somebody, are you willing to pay more for a silent boat that allows you to actually hear the birds? Right? Focus on the customer experience, not on the environmental impact. And you're not going to pay more to your supplier to change a boat. But what you may do is say, I'm going to provide you a letter that says, here is a guaranteed income for 3 years. So you can go to the bank and get a loan to change the engine. It doesn't even have to be about paying more. It has to be about providing the right contractual conditions in your supply chain. So your suppliers know they've got guaranteed business and they can plan.
This is a sort of negative point, but it's reality. I was geeking out about 6 months ago doing some research looking at the forward build rate of new airports and the forward build rate of airport extensions. That was huge. That was actually bigger than the new airports. It seems to be easier to get an airport extension than a new airport. I then geeked out at looking at the forward orders for aircraft, Boeing and Airbus and one of the Chinese manufacturers. I then doubly geeked out and looked at the forward orders for cruise ships getting built.
Yeah.
And when you put all of that together, basically there's billions of dollars being bet, be that as a bet on huge growth, because you will not spend these hundreds of billions if growth wasn't coming.
And huge growth based on the idea that, yes, the new ships and the new airplanes will be marginally more efficient than the ones we've got now. Marginally could go up to 20%, okay? But fundamentally, when you're looking at the growth in total and the reduction in intensity on fuel usage is not sufficient. The figures don't know that. If you want to geek out further, also ask, what is the typical lifespan of an airplane or a cruise ship? And then you know for how long these things are going to be running. In addition to that, the ones that are being decommissioned, they're not being fully decommissioned. They're just being sent to other countries where the environmental standards are going to be lower.
Decommission one country, sent to another country, still carrying on. So let's finish up our conversation today on some positives. What are the real positives you're seeing out there, not just in tour operating, but travel in general? What's things that people can look at and basically copy? Because everybody likes seeing good things happening, and we're not shy, we'll copy good practices.
So one thing I think that your listeners can focus on, based on the kind of companies they are, is tourism gives you a fantastic opportunity for people to reflect and respond and to learn new things and to go back home changed. Transformational travel doesn't just have to be a slogan. It can be something that the way you design your products, you can work towards. So I know that flying for 10 days to India to go and see tiger reserves is not sustainable because I'm flying. However, can you design those tours in a way that it changes how I think for the remaining 50 weeks of the year? And I go back and I fundamentally change some of my lifestyle choices. And if we do that, I think that let's use tourism as a force for good. That is one element. In addition to, you've got due diligence, that you need to put that in place. Look at how understand the impacts that you're responsible for. Acknowledge that even if they're part of your supply chain, that's your responsibility. You've chosen to market that product in the way it is. And find ways in which you can make an improvement that will give you that win-win. And I know that's a horrible kind of expression, but I think we can still find ways. There are so many low-hanging fruit to try to improve the customer experience, try to improve the working conditions and job security of your supply chains, try to differentiate your product on the back of what you've got here. Like if right now I want to do the India Golden Triangle, how many tour operators do I have that are offering this to me? Far too many. And they all go to exactly the same places. How do you differentiate your product? Find a way of making it more authentic, more real, to get to see the real India much more close up. It's one of the many ways in which you can do that.
So for all our listeners, there we have it. It falls into your skill set because you're expert designers of experience. So going forward, we all just need to think about a bit deeper on the design of that experience, and we can all design sustainability into the experience and all do our 1% and then another 1% and another 1%, and eventually we'll do the best job we can in this situation. Xavier, thank you very much for all your knowledge and wisdom, and I know you're a deep expert in this area, and thank you very much for helping your operators.
Thanks for having me.